This is Chris Lincoln, and I also have my engineer Kevin Holbrook with us. I'll let him introduce himself when we get there. I want to thank everyone for attending today. We still might have a few stragglers come in, but again, thank you for the time. We know we only got about an hour, so we'll really jump right in, but a couple housekeeping items. First of all, I want to make sure everybody can hear me. So if you cannot hear me, type something right in the questions section. Let me know, or raise your hand if you cannot hear. Otherwise, we'll kind of get going. With that as well, if you have any questions throughout the presentation, through my part or even Kevin's, please type them in the questions section, and we'll answer them either throughout or at the end, depending on what the question might be. Try not to put anything in the chat. We probably won't be looking at that, so you'll be just talking to yourself. Anybody, again, has any questions, just let us know. What we're going to really start out with is really jump right in. Today is this part one of the three-part Composer series. This is the See It, Prove It, Touch It webinar. So the first part, the See It, we're going to start right out with a poll question. So if you could, hopefully you can see this come up. So I really want to get an idea of how you first learned about 3D via Composer. So if you could take a second and answer that, and we'll open it up. Good. Looks like we got most everybody in, and we'll show you the results here real quick. So good. It sounds like myself, or most of you, is how you got in here. So that's a good thing. I'm interested about the others as well, but we can get to that at a later point. So one more quick poll regarding the current documentation process that you're doing now, if you don't mind responding to this as well. Great. Just one more second. We'll allow people to answer. Good, good. And we'll show you the results of this. This is not uncommon. You know, most people are using photographs as well as CAD screenshots. So something that we're seeing across the board. And hopefully today, at the end of this, you'll be able to get something out of it to really learn some different techniques or a different process of doing this documentation method. So we'll jump right in. So what is Composer? Right? It's a 3D tool that leverages your 3D engineering data for creating all graphical content. Now we're going to be able to talk about assembly instructions, product manuals, training material, and definitely marketing collateral as well. Now we'll really jump in to show you how that works. Well, some of the basic stuff we can do with our standard documentation is to create the 2D content, vector and raster images, some high resolution images, silhouette, wireframe, flat renderings as well. So the typical process that most of our customers, probably a lot like yourselves, are using today. So they're really looking about this process, your engineering design, then to get in your technical graphics, the documentation, and that gets to the customer. Hopefully most everyone on here is using SOLIDWORks. If not, the nice thing about Composer, it is CAD neutral. So that's in the engineering design phase. The products are prototypes. As most of you said, you're doing digital pictures or bitmap screenshots using your CAD. That's the next step. This is where Adobe comes in using the raster and vector images. The next step, now you're moving this over into InDesign or Publisher or Word. Then we're creating a PDF. Now that's getting sent out to our customers, whether that be a web, print, CD, or ROM. As you can see, it's a fairly long process. Taking that a step further, here's what it looks like, kind of a sequential. Right? So you start with the product development process, which this one is, building on our last slide. You're going from the concept to the product development, then the prototype, the design, and then the documentation. Starting near the end. Our goal is to really shorten this process, to make it more efficient as well as even more effective. So how are we going to change this? How are we going to make it shorter? Basically what we're going to do is make it more parallel. So we're going to shorten this process by doing the documentation at the same time we're really starting the design and the prototypes. With this tool, and what you'll be able to see here, is that any changes that are made can be done almost at the same time. So we're really not waiting until the very end to do our documentation. We really want to speed this process up, which is going to allow us to get to our product to the market faster, more efficiently, and more cost effectively. So this should look pretty familiar to a lot of you according to your answers. What content is being created today? A lot of text, screenshots, as well as some CAD drawings. It's pretty low quality, not effective. This also should look maybe a little familiar to you. Example of some non-effective assembly instructions. If you take a look at number 63, what is that? I have no idea. How is somebody going to put that together? So the idea is really to make this a little bit more clear. And some questions that can come up to assembly instructions that you're seeing there. What happens if you can't understand it? I can't understand 63. I'm sure most of you can't either. How are we going to put that together? How are we going to assemble that? What if it's in a different language? One thing about 3D via Composer is we have the capabilities to do almost any language out there. So that barrier is now going to be not an issue. And what if they're not accurate? Now we have to go back to the beginning to make changes. With Composer, we're going to be able to do these on the fly, so to speak. So where does Composer fit along the enterprise? As you can see, about everywhere. Now we're going to go from assembly instructions. Our manufacturing guys on the shop floor are going to be able to pull up the Composer and let us see how things can go together. Training material. Instead of doing the typical training manuals, we can use Composer with that. The marketing and sales piece, going directly to the website, the quotation. There's a lot of different uses for Composer, and we're really going to show you some of them today. The typical workflow, well, this is a SolidWorks screenshot, as you can see, but the idea is using this directly into Composer, and again, it is CAD neutral, so that could be a different CAD program you're seeing as well. Incorporated into Composer, and our final output is what you're going to really see the benefit to. Really what that is a great lead-in to allow Kevin to show you a little bit more of how we handle standard documentation. And then I'll come back in a little bit and show you a little bit more of some of the other interactive ways that Composer can assist.
Okay, let's talk a little bit about standard documentation. When I talk about standard documentation, we're really dealing with what is typically a 2D output, a PDF, a Word document. There's many different ways that we're getting the content that's contained within this documentation. Well, what I have now is an example of a Word document that might be similar to an output that you might have, except in this case, 3D via Composer has created all the images contained within this document. I'll just kind of scroll through here. The text in this case is completely irrelevant. 3D via Composer is going to be the tool that brings us the images directly from the 3D CAD model. The key to using Composer is to leverage the hard work that everybody in engineering has already done to create this real nice, intelligent SolidWorks or Inventor or Pro E model so that we can reuse it down the line. Now, in my example here, we've already started the documentation. As Chris described, this is a parallel process now with Composer, in that I've started the documentation before the final design was ever completed. That way, when I get my final design brought into Composer, I can automatically export it out and update my documentation a little bit later. So let's go into Composer for a moment. How do we get to this point? Well, as Chris talked about the process, it's nothing more than a file open. We select the type of CAD file that I would like to bring in, whether it's Pro E, whether it's CATIA, whether it's Inventor part or assembly. We bring those files in directly to a Composer. Now, Composer is going to create a kind of a mapping to understand what the file structure looks like so that when we bring it in next time, it knows how to update. Now, some of the things I want to point out is if I go to the Assembly tab in Composer, it automatically brings in the same assembly structure that existed within the CAD tool. So you'll have sub-assemblies and parts exactly as they existed inside the CAD tool for structuring purposes. A little bit about the interface. Composer does use the ribbon bar style menu structure that SOLIDWORks has taken on. However, I want to be clear that Composer is not necessarily written to be a CAD designer's tool. CAD designers will pick it up very easily and quickly and learn a lot of the tools, but if you're not in the CAD world, you also can pick up Composer very easily. couple other areas that we focus on within Composer. We have a tab titled Views. Views is where we go to store any of the 2D content or images that we want to use in other documentation. And you can see I only have one listed there. It's like taking your camera out to the shop floor and taking pictures of the prototype, except I'm doing it here within Composer. Composer is going to keep track of all the images, exact angles and colors that I've used to take the picture, and it's always going to allow me to come back and make the changes. You'll also notice at the bottom there's a properties window, and this will be important for anybody doing documentation. You need the ability to make changes, whether it's a change to the color, it's changed to how the part looks within the window, the reflectivity or the material. You need to be able to modify all of that. And in Composer, you can modify all those values separate from the CAD tool. In other words, I can make all these changes and they're not going to affect the original CAD model that I brought in. Now what that allows your documentation group is some freedom to be able to make changes without having that effect on SOLIDWORKS. Now how do we work within this software? It really is very simple in that we're going to start to set up the views that I want to use within my documentation. For instance, if I know I need a right side view in one of my images for the documentation, I put it in the right side view and then I just snap a picture. If I know I had a view of this subassembly up to the top and I knew I needed to kind of isolate it here, I could go ahead and get it to that location, snap the picture. Or maybe I wanted to render it in a different style, for instance in a silhouette style, and I wanted to change the background to white. I could go ahead and do that and render a picture. On top of just taking snapshots of your CAD model, we have the ability to author other content. When we talk about author other content, this is something that companies are typically taking the images into other programs and adding things to it. Things like arrows, circular arrows, corner arrows, lines, paths, labels, callouts, dimensions, section views, all those can be done in Composer here. For instance, if I want to just have a label calling out some part numbers for some of the parts that I have in this particular window. Now the properties of these callouts are completely customizable as well. If I pick any of them, I have a full property window that I can modify. Now you'll also notice that it automatically pulls up some information in these labels. This happens to be the file name that I've selected. The neat thing about bringing your CAD tool in is that we also bring in the metadata. When we bring in the metadata, we can reuse that metadata in things like bill of materials, notes, callouts, so that we can reuse them on images. Okay, if I've made a change to an image, it's very easy for me to just tell the software to update the view. It's like taking a new picture. Everything's there for you. Also with the feature tree here, with having the full structure, it makes it very easy for me to isolate individual components. I'm going to just tell it I want to view this subassembly and I want to hide everything else, and it brings it right into view for me. And again, I have control over things like, do I want the ground to be viewed? Do I want to render this in a different style? Maybe I want to show how some things get pulled off of here. I have full control over that. Now let me ask you this for anybody doing CAD work. What's this like in SOLIDWORKS? When you need to show bits and pieces of an assembly, you have to create configurations. You have to create more overhead in the CAD tool, which slows down your files, makes it a little bit harder to work going forward. If you don't save those and something changes on your CAD model, somebody's going to come back to you and you're going to have to redo it all over again. Well, in Composer, it saves these. So when I get the view that I want, I just snap the view. Well, maybe I want to pull some of these parts off of here. For instance, maybe I want to show how this end piece and these clips come off. Well, in Composer, I also have the ability to create exploded views. I can go ahead and grab a couple of the fasteners here. We'll grab all 4 of them. And just like SOLIDWORKS, I can pull those out. There's some washers in behind it. I can go ahead and do that as well. And I can go ahead and pull those out as well. Now, I may want to author some other items with this. In other words, I may want to I pulled those down, sorry. Let's do this. Always an undo. I'll make sure I get the right direction here. Okay. The green arrow is the one I really wanted. Pull them out. Anytime you create an explode like this, you can also author things like arrows. I think arrows are a phenomenal way, and people are doing this now, but they're doing it with other tools, of showing how things go together. And Composer also has the ability to snap to individual content as well. So these are actually snapped to the fastener itself. But I have control over things like the opacity, whether it's on top of the files or not, or I can control the length or distance of where those arrows show. And at any point in time, I can come over here and snap a view. Now, here's the neat thing. I've just snapped views and I've kind of reorganized the data. If I want to go back to a base level, I just double-click on the previous view, and Composer remembers everything. Remembers exactly whether the floor was on, whether the colors was on, how I rendered it, and it takes me right back to that individual section. If I wanted to go back to the subassembly view, I could go right to the subassembly just by double-clicking on it, and it's going to bring me right back to that section. So maybe I want to do something like a section view. I can come in here outside of SOLIDWORKS and create a section that will section through my geometry. Maybe I only want to section through one component. I can apply it to a particular component and get a cross section that's very unique, very different to see. Try doing that in SOLIDWORKS. How many features do you have to create to get something like that in SOLIDWORKS? And again, I can still come in here, create labels showing the different components that we have in here. Okay, when I want to save this as a view, I just hit my create view and I have everything I need to move forward. Now let's move on in the process a little bit, because the CAD model is changed here. Now I'm going to go to a different document. This is the one where I created all the views that were used in the other document, the Word document that you saw. I have section views in here. I did isolate some of the sub-assemblies a little bit. Let me take you through some of these. Exploded views of fasteners. I created a bill of materials, which I'll show in a little bit here. Okay, let's see, cross sections, exploded views. But here's how it's going to be, in your process today. Somebody's still going to make a change. There's still going to be a revision of the CAD model, most likely. What do I do with what I've already done? Well, let's go look at my CAD model for a moment. I'm going to point out the changes because they might be a little bit subtle here. I've actually taken the opening on the blue part and changed it up. I've added kind of a rib structure, and it's now slotted. I've widened and changed the angle of this first piece here, and I've lengthened the end of this part and added some fillets around the end there. Let me just point this out in this tool so you can see where those changes are going to come in. You'll notice at the end of this part there are no fillets. Okay, notice what the cutout looks like on the top of this plate, the aperture there. So how do I get those changes into Composer when I'm ready so that I can update my documentation? It's real simple. For standard documentation, we come in here, tell it to update my 3D via Composer document. I grab my original CAD model. That could be Inventor, that could be Pro-E, that could be a neutral format like IGES and STEP. You grab that original file, you set your import settings, and you tell it to update. The software is going to launch the converter. It's going to compare the two. If there's been fasteners that's been added, you'll see the new fastener. If there's components that have been removed, those will be removed from the images. Okay? What you're going to do is then look through all the images, make sure there's no new components that you have to explode, and then you can republish all your images. Okay, this should only take a moment here. It's going to update all the views, and now you notice immediately in my graphics area, the easiest one to view here is the new aperture plate. I have the new fillets on the other component. If I go to any view within here, they all have the new components within them. Any section views are updated. Any exploded views are updated. Okay, now what do I do if I want to get this information out to the Word document? Well, that's very simple. Okay, we just go ahead and turn on a workshop called High Resolution Image. This is for your rasterized images, things like JPEG, bitmap, TIFF, PNG. For those formats, we can control the pixel DPI sizes that you want to store these documents in. We can also create profiles so you don't have to reset those each time. What's nice also about this is the ability to save out all the views in one shot. So when I do a save as, and I browse to the location where I have this image, and I do a save, it's going to ask me if I want to replace the other images that exist. Okay, it's writing out each one of those pictures out to that directory. Now, if we go back to Word, you can see Word is not immediately updated, right? Everyone sees that? Well, in Word, we have a couple ways to update our links. We can go to the actual links while Word is open, select all the links, and tell it to update now. Or the other option, you notice the parts twisting in there, the other option is just to reopen the Word document. Now, all of the images, you'll notice they all have the new aperture plate within them. So it makes it very easy for standard documentation to create images in Composer, continue to update your CAD data, and when you're done, you're ready to bring in that data and update your documentation, which gives us a nice parallel process.
Thanks, Kevin. Hey, one thing I want to do is open up to another poll, which a good lead in here, so we can put that up on the screen. So if you could take a second to answer this question regarding your current process and how you're dealing with product changes that happen. Good, we'll give another couple seconds to allow everyone to vote. Excellent. As you're going to see, this is no surprise to us. Most everyone is redoing all the content that's reflected in the change. So 80% of us, that's a big number, and hopefully with what you saw a little bit through what Kevin showed you, we're going to be able to really change that process that you're currently doing. So just going on a little bit further on some of the interactive components that Composer has. So we'll be able to do some 3D content. Well, this is where we're going to get into the fun stuff, I like to say, of Composer, and really the neat things that it can do. The interactive bill of materials, the digger. We're going to show you what these are. The animations, the videos. This is where it really starts getting fun and really the neat part of this product. So here's some of the examples of things we can do. An interactive content. You can see here. Animations. Now, how easy is this? You're showing somebody actual animations and videos of how to do the assembly, what parts of it. How many words would that take to write that out? So we'll jump in real quick to show you the interactive documentation and how that can be done in Composer.
As Chris said, this is kind of the fun part, but I also call it somewhat of a futuristic part, because there's not a lot of organizations that are creating content that is very dynamic and interactive for their customers. And when I say customers, it could be the manufacturing floor, it could be the sales department, it could be an end customer, or it could be web content. I want to talk about how we might get to that level and what kind of things that we can create out of Composer. I'm going to take you first of all to some examples that I've created directly from that content. This one is an SVG file, which is created by our workshop for creating vector graphics. Vector graphics are graphics that are represented by lines and arcs. Essentially, you can change them to any size and not worry about the quality. But one of the things we can take directly out of SOLIDWORKS is creating these interactive vector graphics where we have a bill of material, and when we select on an item in the bill of material, it takes us to the item in the graphics area. So an interactivity with the documentation. Maybe this is on your web page. Maybe you give this to someone on the shop floor so they know all the components contained within the subassembly. The next type of document I want to talk about with interactivity with Composer is the ability to create an HTML web page using the images that we created inside a Composer. Now these are the same set of images that you saw that are part of that standard documentation, but I've published an HTML file which I'm going to show you live as well. This uses an ActiveX control that Composer creates that allows me now to publish a web page that's interactive. The notes are interactive. I'm able to go from one view to another just by clicking on it. Launch it here. My resources might be hurting me a little bit. Let's see. Okay. Now you'll notice when this image does come up that there's a BOM table in here as well. And I think I'm having a little bit of resource problem here. But when I click on the BOM table, the image in the corner will actually present the unique component as it relates to that. And I just look at this as if you got customers coming in and reordering spare parts, it gives them that interactive feeling on how to find the parts and reorder for creating these HTML web pages. Show you another example here. Here's the same document. This is opened up in 3D Player. This 3D Via Player is an application just like eDrawings. It's free for the masses, so you can install it on every PC within your organization. What this does is it allows you to open up the files that are created in Composer. They have a particular extension titled SMG. Well, you can tell the shop floor, open up this SMG file because it contains the information that they need. Here's an example of some of the things you can get inside a Composer. Things like storyboarding, where I can click on an image and it takes me directly to that image. This digger tool, this is the digger. I'm going to show you how to do that live. It allows you to narrow down to a particular area within the software. Or we could just put play and next buttons in here. So the user might have step-in-step work instructions, or once he's done with one step, he just clicks the button, it takes him to the next step in the process. This is all opened up in a player that you install on your machines, or you can send like eDrawings as an executable. So how do we get to this point with Composer? Well, we have that same document that we were working on before that we used for the standard documentation. How do I create interactive storyboards? Well, this is very simple. I just come to the software and say, you know what, I want an image on here that shows the bill of materials. If they click on it, it's going to take them to it. I just hold down my control key and I drag it onto that view, and it automatically creates the storyboard. Maybe I want another one in here in this corner that shows me how to get to the cross section. What about the digger? The digger is triggered by a space bar. The digger is a neat tool in that it allows you to focus on a particular area even while you're zoomed out. So let's say I wanted to highlight one of the springs and I'm zoomed out. I just use my focus tool to tell it where I want to look. I tell it how I want to zoom in on this thing. And I can even change the radius and diameter of this. And again, I can even refocus at any time. Okay, once I get the image I want, I can leave it as is, and when they open it up in the player, they're going to have the ability to interact with this tool. Now there are some other features of this tool, things we call onion skin, where we can kind of roll back the layers here. Maybe you want to focus on a part that's hidden. There's something called X-ray that does like rolling back, but it also ghosts out any components that are hidden. But it's these types of things that you can't do in SOLIDWORKS that helps you create more effective documentation. Now you saw me create documentation that had buttons in there. You saw those little next buttons. I want to show you how easy it is to publish those. I just go under the authoring section and I tell the software I want to author 2D images. And some of those are next, previous, first, and last. I'm just going to pick all buttons and I'm going to drop it on here. Tell the software to update the view. Now, if I want all those buttons on every view, it's very simple. Any change you make, you can propagate to multiple views just by selecting the views that you want it on, right-clicking and say update the views with those particular actors or items. And it's going to go through, and now I have buttons on every single one of those. But what about bill of materials and interactive bill of materials? Well, at any point I can isolate individual components or subassemblies, as you saw me do in standard documentation. But let's try to bill of material of this particular document or this subassembly. I'm going to actually turn off my digger here. I'm going to get rid of you. All right, doesn't want to get rid of. Well, anyway, our workshop here allows us to turn on a workshop that helps us to create bill of materials. And I'm just going to leave this off to the side for a moment. I tell the software what it is I'd like to generate bill of material IDs for. Is it one call out per BOM ID? How I'm going to create those. So I generate the BOM IDs. I can create my call outs from here. I can tell it where I want those call outs, top, bottom, right, left. I'm going to just throw those in the top for this matter. And the BOM table is created, if you look off to the left, the BOM table is created based upon information contained within Composer. Now you do have the ability, since we're opening the CAD data inside of Composer, you do have the ability to get to the properties that were brought in with this as well. So maybe there's a description, there's a part number, there's some other bit of data that was brought with this. You can also add that to the table. Now once you have the table in here, again we have control over the size of the table. Now you saw that interactive SVG file. It's very simple to create. First I want to update my view, make sure this is stored within Composer, and I just tell it I want a technical illustration. The formats that we can save out there are SVG, EPS, SVGZ, and CGM. If I want to see what I'm getting into here, I just hit my preview button. And I'm able to see what this SVG file is going to look like. And again, we have control over the line weights, the quality, the colored sections. I mean, we can really have good control over this. And now I've created an interactive image that I can place on a website or embed in another document. Very easy to create. How about creating an HTML file? Well, I just come in here to Composer and tell it I want to publish an HTML. The HTML output has different options to it. In other words, different templates. Very simple, one that pulls in BOM views, one that pulls in metadata. I'll just pick one of these, tell it where I want to save it, and I'm going to go save it right to there, and it will actually save out the HTML file. Let's go back, and I just want to show that real quick. And here's the HTML file that I just created. Again, it runs on ActiveX Player. It's able to launch directly in the HTML window. Imagine if your customer could go to your website and see stuff like this to order a part or to buy your products. Okay, it makes it real nice to be able to get to this information. Now, I've added a bunch of interactive content to this set of images. Maybe I did that because I want our shop floor to be able to interact with the data. Well, as I told you, this file extension .smg is what is opened in the player and used on the shop floor. One thing I do want to point out, when I go to save that SMG file, I can do a couple things. If it's going outside the walls of my organization, I can password protect it. I can also reduce the accuracy. You saw we can put dimensions on there. Maybe I don't want my vendor to be able to dimension and get some actual sizes from it. Maybe I want to go to the rights manager here and say, you know what, whoever opens this in player won't have the rights to put any annotations on it. They can't do cuts. They can't see bill of materials. Okay, they aren't going to see certain things within it. Or maybe I want to expire this. If you're sending this to somebody else or even manufacturing, you know that you only want this to exist for a few days because you don't want them opening it up in 2 months and trying to repeat a process that you know is going to change. You can tell it, here's the start date, here's the end date, and this file will no longer work inside a player at that point. So you have some really nice tools to be able to set up that interactivity for your users. And I'm going to just give this a name, save it out. Now to open it in Player, it's very simple. We open up the player in its own window, perform a file open, and up a level here, and open that up in the player. You'll see the same images that I just created. Okay, you can have my interactive storyboard. You can see the digger is going to work right in the player. You're going to have your interactive panels. If I click on a panel, it's going to take me directly to that particular image. I have my buttons that work that will allow me to go back and forth. Now, one of the things we haven't talked about yet is the ability to create video or animation content. Okay, here's an example. I just have a series of images that I created, and if I wanted to create an animation, I'm actually going to select all the keys and just delete these for a moment. This is how easy it is to create an animation inside a Composer. The key to doing this in Composer is to use the images you have to help you with the animation. So for instance, if I want at 0 seconds it to look like it does right there, I drag the image at the 0 second mark. If I want it to stay like that for 4 seconds, I drag it again at the 4 second mark. If I then wanted to zoom in, I go to zoom in. Maybe I give it 2 seconds to zoom in, and then I give it 2 seconds to fade to just the subassembly. Once it fades to the subassembly, I give it 6 seconds to explode. And again, I'm just dragging the images. Once it explodes, I'll give it maybe a second to put itself back together, and then we'll give it 6 or so seconds to show us the whole assembly. Now, imagine doing this in Animator in SOLIDWORKS. Okay, it's going to stay like that for a moment in time. It's going to zoom. It's going to start to isolate the subassembly. It's going to explode it. I give it so much time to explode. But in SOLIDWORKS, we have to create all the keys for the camera and the rotations and all those other things. Here we don't have to. Okay, it does it all for us. If in the end, maybe I wanted to show this thing at a different angle. Okay, I just snap the view. I drag the view on there at a different angle, and now my image now has a rotation at the end that shows me, guides me into that particular view. Okay. Now the animations in Composer are going to be slightly different than the animations inside of SOLIDWORKS. Composer is more for how to put things together, not necessarily how they work. Can we take a part and show it in 2 different positions as if it's moving? Absolutely. In this case, I'm moving multiple components, but you can take a single part and slide it along a conveyor, and if you animate between them, it's going to show that part moving from one to the other. So you can very easily get to those different sections. Okay, I think that's what I had here. I want to pop it back over to Chris for a second.
Great, thank you, Kevin. What I want to do is just kind of go through a kind of a slight recap of some things that we can do with Composer that you saw, and hopefully it kind of ties it all together to make sense. So as you showed you, we do have some exploded views, and before I get to that too, I see we do have a question. We'll get to that here in a second. I just want to get through this real quick, so we're going to have a good 5-10 minutes at the end to answer some questions. So if you just kind of hang tight, we'll get to them in a second. So again, we can do some exploded views with it. As we showed you, the vector and raster graphics, the high resolution images, we can really get some very good pictures, as you can see here, of what things can do. Now, some shaded illustrations, you have a lot of control over how the product or how the image is going to look. The interactive bounds, as Kevin showed you. Some silhouette wireframes and flat renderings as well. And then again, the interactive storyboards. So the really powerful tool too is that the animations. Again, how easy would that be to be in SolidWorks? And how powerful is that to show somebody to put something together instead of having a text document? Now, the one thing, too, before I get into this real quick, is the one thing great about this tool is, as we mentioned in the beginning, you don't need to have an engineering background or design background to do this. It's made for anybody to use. It's very quick, very easy to pick up. One thing I wanted a good lead-in is the Aberdeen Group, if you're familiar with them. Basically, it's a group of companies that leverage 3D CAD data for documentation. Some of these results, I'm not going to read them to you, but they're very powerful. You're going to really see some of the benefits that they've seen from a documentation tool such as Composer. The one that I really want to point out, the big one, almost a 20% increase in revenue over the previous 24 months. That's a huge increase, and from using a product such as this, that's really the bottom line to really show you the cost effectiveness. So again, wrapping it up, the leverage of 3D CAD data. The idea is to become a more efficient process, and also to make more effective content. It's going to really affect our engineering. The time delays, late design changes are something that we want to make more efficient. Again, we don't ever want to be over budget or delay a time to market, so something like this tool is going to really help us out there. Being effective as well is going to have the shop floor guys be able to use the content and not see a huge document with 700 pages of text. Now we're going to be able to really make this more effective. And again, we want to really cut down on the cost and really make this more effective. Well, again, this is a real quick summary, just basically wrapping up what we said here. Again, we want to make stunning visuals quick and easy. Now, this is really going to benefit all aspects of our company, through manufacturing, sales, marketing, to engineering as well. So what we have right here is basically a couple questions that have come out, so we want to kind of get to them. One of the first questions is,
okay, that's right. How about animating a moving part? I think I addressed that during the animation portion. If you're moving in between views, of the variation is just a part moving, we can absolutely show that. But somebody asked if the buttons can hold custom images, and that's important as well. In Composer, when I actually author an image like a button like that, they have some predefined images. But if I pick any image, you can go Google an image and actually place it on there. What happens is the image, to make it interactive, and I'll show you by using a file here. Once the image is placed on there, there's an event section under Properties where you can tell it, if you click that image, that it actually is linked to something else. Now, I'll use that, and I'll show an example of that. Let me just find my example that I want to use here. I have a very good example for that one. That's car right here. Here's an example of somebody. These are all customer examples of somebody who's done something very similar. Here we have 2D images that are on there. This is just an image that says display colors. When I click on it, it makes other images show. And these are just 2D splotches that if I click on them, they change the color of the car. Are they really changing the color of the car? Not really. They're going to another stored image where the color has been changed. So a neat way to view that. Notice this has some interactivity, like opening up the door, closing the door, bending the mirror, those types of things. There's a question, is there a coding language available for developers? The only coding that I am aware of, I can check further into the Composer product, it really has to do with Player and the ability to code things into Player and embed Player into other areas. I believe that's the open portion of Composer at this point. A lot of people want to take 3D via Player and embed it into their own. Maybe there's a spreadsheet on their website to tell them how to order product, and this pops up and actually shows them the product or so on. Got a question. Do you have the ability to pull multiple assembly files in Composer to create animations and documentation? Have a screwdriver position to show how it might interact? Absolutely. We call it, some of the names are a little bit different in Composer. So if I wanted to, as part of this assembly, I can bring in other product. I can add products which allow me to go ahead and pull in a screwdriver, pull in another item, and position it and show how it interacts. The neat thing about that process is the fact that we're CAD neutral. So if you go out to the web and you find an IGES file, a wrench that's an IGES file, you can absolutely do that. And let me see if I got anything that shows an example of that. Let me go back in here just for a moment. Looking for it right here. This one does. This one has those same type of examples that you're talking about. So here's a bunch of other things in this different one here. Now we can also have it, and this is something we didn't show, is when it gets to a certain point in an animation, it could prompt you to do something. In this case, it's flashing, waiting for the user to interact with the image. If I select on the image, it takes me to the next section, and it shows me, in this case, how to remove something from the view. Any chance you can email us the car.exe? I might be able to. I got to see if we have the ability to send those out. We can always even show your marketing department as well a quick presentation if you'd like of that. But I'll find out which ones I can send out, and if you send Chris an email, we can do that as well. Okay. I think that's the last of the questions. I want to share one more poll with you. Chris, you can go ahead.
Yeah, so as you can see on your screen now, it should be popping up. Just wanted to get a kind of a good understanding of what kind of impact this tool might have on your current process. So if you could, please give us an answer on this, and then we'll report back.
Okay, we're going to go ahead and close the poll. We'll show you here.
So as you'll see, the results will come up right now. Pretty much what we expected. You're going to see, probably a third of the group's going to see a very big impact with something like this. The rest, a good 2/3 of them is going to see a moderate impact, and that's better than nothing, right? We're just glad we're seeing with no impact. One other question that came up is, what is the cost of this? Again, I don't really want to get into too much of that here. It's kind of keep it pretty basic overview. What I can do is reach out to you individually, talk about some of the different options that we have, because there is some multiple options that we have with the product. If there's any other questions, we're happy to take them. Otherwise, one thing I want to talk about is, as you saw on the very first slide, actually, this is part one of a 3-part series. So what we're doing with this product is allowing our customers, and hopefully who's attending here, is a chance to see it, which we showed today. The next one is really to prove how it works. So what we'd like to do, and that's scheduled for Wednesday, May 9th as a follow-up. We might have to do 2 days of this, but we're happy to do so if we have the people. But what we're going to do is actually take some time with Kevin and myself and you, the customer, to really go through your current documentation process, show how it can be done with 3D via Composer. Really the whole proving aspect, to prove to you how it can be done more effectively and more efficiently. The third part, which we can talk to as we get there, would be actually to come in and actually play with the software yourself. So you don't have to go in the order. If you want to just jump right in and come play with the software, we're going to do that later in May, and that was actually part of the invite. So you should see the series and how you can register for them. But what we can do is really talk about that as we get there. Oh, and it looks like another question came in.
Is there a way to reorder balloons so they are in the number order from right to left? Yeah, absolutely, Rick. You can. It's basically doing a structure based upon the assembly as it comes in, like SolidWorks will do. But you can pick on a single item and do a reorder, and it will start to reorder the balloons. It doesn't recreate them. It just starts to change the numbers for you from that portion, clockwise or counterclockwise. We do have those options.
Good. Now, one thing I want to kind of leave as we sign off here too is, this is a very new process to what a lot of people are using. This is really going to set you apart from your competition. A lot of people aren't using this kind of technique to really show and do their assembly instructions or marketing pieces, and something like this is going to really put you ahead of some of the people that are doing the standard documentation that we've talked about. So